poker's legendary champions, next generation stars, and tireless ambassadors of the game, sharing their wisdom and guiding your journey to high achievement on the green felt. This is Chasing Poker Greatness with your host, Brad Wilson.
Welcome, my friend, to the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Brad Wilson, and today's guest on the show is high-stakes mixed game player Mike Noori. You may remember Mike from a bet that went viral on poker Twitter a few years back, where he bet he could eat more than $1,000 worth of McDonald's food in 36 hours, which, as Jimmy Frick pointed out, would have been approximately 66,000 calories. Spoiler alert, he failed pretty spectacularly. You actually won't hear anything about this bet covered in this episode because the thing has been discussed ad nauseum. And, well, Mike's probably had enough McDonald's-related items spew out of his mouth for one lifetime. Instead, we focus on the area in Mike's life where he's achieved consistent success over a very long period of time, high-stakes mixed-game poker. In today's episode, you are going to learn where Mike believes his biggest edge as a poker player comes from, a WSOP main event degen story that has a very happy ending, why there's a ton of value in being underestimated at the poker tables, and much, much more. So without any further ado, I bring to you the fearless, high-stakes, mixed game crusher, Mike Noori. Mike, welcome to the show, sir. How you doing?
Hey, how's it going, Brad?
It's going pretty well. Excited to get this thing underway. Shout out to Matt Savage, who made the connection here, and he actually gave me a whole list of things to ask you and talk about.
We can go. I can go. Matt could go on and on about me for many shows. So I'm sure that list is pretty long.
It was. He's like, hey, ask about this. Ask about this. Ask about this. I'm like, all right, man. I'll do my best, man. I'll do my best.
You gotta filter the list for sure.
Yeah. So really, I just want to get started by asking you your story. How'd you get involved playing cards?
I watched the first season of the World Poker Tour when I was about 13 or 14 years old, and me and my brother and a couple of our friends were over watching. We're like, oh, this is cool, and we're like, oh, let's try it. And we started playing for like nickels and dimes and like we took our change out of our little change piggy banks or whatever and stacked it up right next to us. And because we didn't have chips, and started playing that way, started playing home games in, middle school, high school, and found internet poker and kind of just went from there was the, short answer for that.
Yeah. So it was a passion at first, first watch, right? Like you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were my whole like core friend group in, middle school, high school was we were all completely obsessed.
Why do you think you were so obsessed? What was it about poker that resonated with you?
I think like the strategy element of it and the luck element of it, and like just combining those two were just so fascinating to us as kids that we were like, we need to learn more and do more with this. And it was just something fun to do. Like after, like, when we had, lunch breaks and free time at school, we would, bust out the cards and deal, even though we weren't supposed to. So we would have to be, we put the cards right away. If a teacher or something came by, we'd have to slide the cards away and whatever. But I mean, yeah, we absolutely loved it.
Did you stay close to those guys who were, in your original circle? Did any of them?
I was the only one that continued to pursue poker on a serious level after high school. Some kind of were like, would go play occasionally here or there, but I was the only one that stuck with it. So I was kind of like, during college and stuff, I didn't really know anybody that played poker. Like, I wasn't close with many people, and I kind of just figured it out on my own.
How old were you, and what year was that?
when we first started playing.
Yeah, I think you said like 13.
13, 14, 15 probably, and started playing, play money on, Poker Stars and Full Tilt and Party Poker like in 2005, and played like the free tournaments and, those Hubbles free rolls on Poker Stars were like all of our friends. We used to play those all the time. So
yeah,
yeah,
like 5 years from there, college, about 2010 when you were
2007, 2008. I graduated high school in 2007. So I'm 31 now. So I started playing a decent amount of online poker. I played tournaments mainly, and then I was kind of bored of, I played sit and goes also too, but I kind of missed the like first initial online poker, wave where everyone was playing, on party poker and sit and goes and,
yeah, party poker was gone at that point.
Correct. Yeah. By the time I turned 18, party poker was gone. So kind of missed that initial wave of the online poker boom. But I played a bunch of tournaments and then played sit and goes also too. And then I kind of migrated into playing mixed games a lot because it's just to break up the tournaments. Like I played, a bunch of tournaments on Sundays and all of that. So I started playing mixed cash game like on the side to like, I don't know, just keep me more entertained, learn more games. Was really fascinated learning more games and stuff. And that's kind of how I got into playing mixed games, which I've done basically since I'm 21 on. I've basically played a little amount of tournaments and primarily I'm a mixed game cash game player now.
And you mentioned you were in college. What were you in school for? Did you get your degree? And
that's a good story. So I ended up going to school at San Diego State for business management. And while I was there, I basically just played poker the whole time. The Indian casinos were close and they were 18 and over. So I would go play cash games there at Verona, Viejas, Saquon. Those three were like, you could get all the action back then. I mean, those games down there in the, late, 2007 to 2009 when I was there they were amazing. Played a lot of online poker during that time too. So wasn't really going to school. So I made it a year and a half there. I then went to I qualified for PCA for $90, $93, and one of those $33 unlimited rebuy thing. I was in for only $93, and somehow winner take all won the seat. So decided to drop out then. I went to Vancouver to play in the British Columbia Poker Championships in the winter of 2008 and kind of was just traveling, playing poker, went to PCA, didn't do good there, and bought into a bunch of other side tournaments that were way above my bankroll there and kind of went sideways. So then I went back home and went to community college for a little bit and played poker here and kind of grinded back online and was like in school part-time and not. And then I was doing good again over that summer and said like, well, school's not really for me. So kind of dropped out again, kind of did that the next year or two also, went back, grinded, and did that. And then finally I ended up graduating in 2015. So I do have my degree, but haven't used it at all. But I kind of went back and forth between poker and school for, my early 20s.
What'd your parents think of, you pursuing poker, going back to school? What did you think? Did you have any thoughts of like just ditching poker?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of always, wanted to make it work. And like, I don't know, I was young and dumb and not really, focused on like the right things to make it in poker and gambling and all of that. So my dad doesn't gamble at all, doesn't even understand gambling or whatever. But, he's always told me, do what makes you happy and, pursue, what makes, you content and all that. As long as you're not hurting others, he's fine with it. So like my dad was very supportive of it, but didn't understand it at all. And my mom, it took a while for her to come around, but eventually when I was, had some stability and whatever, she understood kind of what, you know, she understood it finally. So
Yeah.
that was good.
Much easier for moms to trust the process when you're stable and making gains, right? It's
Correct. Right. Exactly. Right.
it's the ultimate way to gain trust from your parents. Just have a sustained resume of being successful, and eventually, they're like, whatever, okay, I guess he's gonna be okay.
Correct. Right.
Pursuing this
Exactly.
poker thing.
Right.
So you mentioned playing in the mixed games. I have to assume CPG guest Sean Snyder. I assume you've probably put in some hours.
Yeah, I played we played together at Gardens a handful of times. I mean, I know he's a San Diego guy, so
Yeah.
We've played a handful of times together, probably maybe, I don't know, 10, 20-ish at the most, something like that. We played at Gardens a lot. I mean, before all the casinos got shut down here, we played a decent amount together.
You're in the LA area now?
Yes. I live in Brentwood right now, which is, West LA, kind of right off, Sunset area.
Awesome, man. Yeah, so what would you say it has been like? Actually, I want to dive back into your poker story some. What stakes do you play typically in the mixed game world?
Okay, so I mean, I started playing like 40-80 Omaha 8 or better at Hollywood Park. That's kind of like where I like kind of cut my teeth, like building, a bankroll and having some stability, was playing 40-80 Omaha high low at Hollywood Park. From there, kind of started playing 40-80 mix too. We kind of, that Omaha game kind of, died out eventually. So started playing 40-80 mix at Commerce and Bike and those things. And over the last like 2 years, I've been playing 200-400 mix at Hawaiian Gardens or Commerce or Vegas and whatever. So I'd say probably 200-400 is like my normal limit now.
Nice, man. That's why mixed games? When there are a lot of specialists out there, including myself, who plays just tons of no limit cash and has dipped into the water of PLO for some small percentage of my poker career. Why the attraction to mixed games instead of, the more conventional specialist route?
Right. I mean, I think overall, like, I'm not the best at any one game, but I think my biggest strength in poker is being able to be better than, be above the average in every game and be competent in every game. And, or even if there's a new game that nobody's ever played before and we're like, okay, we're going to try this, I think I'm better at figuring it out quicker than most people. So like, I might not be the best no limit hold'em player or the best PLO player, but I can compete in every game in any format, and I'm fine sitting in any mixed game, where it's a rotation of games and people have strengths and weaknesses, and being able to know, this person's weaker in this game versus this other game, and, the kind of tendencies from there to, figure out kind of where people's strengths and weaknesses are. Is one of my strengths.
Yeah, and that's an awesome poker superpower to have. How did you figure out that you had that power to basically dive into a new game where you're just learning the rules and realize that you're picking it up faster than your competition?
I think not having an ego is like the biggest thing, and being able to be like, and being able to think back on things and rationally analyze it and be like, that didn't really make sense, or that was dumb, or, being able to, check yourself and being, able to accurately analyze what's going on, and, not always knowing that you're going to make the right decision, but being able to, trial and error and kind of not being afraid to fail or, do something dumb, because at the end of the day, it's probably it's going to be a learning experience. So, happy to, go down that route where I think people are either too self-conscious or, afraid to make a mistake or whatever. So
how do you balance this, right? Like it's always a fine balance, right? This humility with confidence, right? Like we're humble, analyzing our game. We realize we don't know everything, and we make stupid mistakes, and we have lots of room to grow, and yet we're still confident enough to sit down and believe that we have an edge over the people we're playing against. So how do you balance that?
I think, the primary focus is to have the confidence, but then also have that, retrospective time and the reflection and, to go through it. But like when you're in game mode, you got to have that confidence, but you shouldn't be second guessing yourself and doing that. I mean, that most of the other stuff comes away from the table.
Yep. I agree. Like the time to study is away from the table. The time to learn is away from the table. And when you're at the table, you're executing, you're performing.
Right. You're going with what you think is best in that moment and have the utmost confidence in that. And then being able to, think back and remember what went on, and then to try and say, okay, well, maybe I should deviate here from this because this guy's, having a tendency to do more of X,
Do you have any methodology for keeping track of these sort of spots that merit another glance, that merit more in-depth analysis?
Most of the time I'll just write down like a quick note in my phone to just kind of remember to after the session on the drive home or whatever, think about something and then, whatever, go plug in whatever I need to on my computer or whatever and run, equities or whatever for certain spots. But most of the time it's, just like analyzing, because in mixed games, it's like player tendencies are huge, especially in limit games, because it's, there's no real, there's no betting size. You don't have to worry about betting sizes or anything like that. So it's more of like, oh, do I think I should be check raising in this spot more because this guy's been, when I check, he bets way too much. So instead of me leading in spots where I normally would against certain players, check raising is going to make me, because 1.5, it's going to make me like 1.5 bets because he's going to bet 50% too much or whatever, whatever the case may be.
So it's playing off of the nature of the opponents that you're battling against and sort of figuring out where they're over bluffing, over betting, and then just pouncing.
Correct, right. Or if they check back too big of a value range, then I'm going to be leading more of my value. It's like kind of, a basic concept there where, you got to be like certain players, are always afraid to get check raised. So they're always going to be checking back in spots where other players bet, 80, 90% of the time.
Yeah. It's, I think that like sometimes folks tend to overthink poker and maybe overcomplicate it a little bit, but like human tendency, human emotion, massive part of determining your poker strategy, reacting, taking advantage of where your opponent's frequencies just don't make sense or where they must be going wrong as it relates to managing their frequencies.
Right. And in limit games and stuff, I personally think that that's the most important factor.
And like how, if you could granularly break that down, how would you do that? Like if somebody out there wants to dive into more mixed games, how would you, if you were them with little experience, how would you approach it?
I mean, first I would learn the horse games before you learn the draw games and stuff, because, those have, easy correlations to like, hold'em and no limit hold'em and PLO and stuff like that. So learning limit hold'em is, easier, and Omaha's easier, and like kind of, the stud games too are a little bit of the same, but not as much. So kind of, learning the equities and learning like which starting hands to play in which positions based on which board textures and stud is important. But, basically going down with, learning the equities in there, but then also stressing to them, like, look, you got to pay attention to what people are doing in certain spots. Like some people in stud always steal. If they're the last to act against the bring in, they raise 100% of the time. So you need to be defending and you need to be raising, lighter than you would against people who are more selective, because, you can get through when they have nothing by Fifth Street, they're probably going to give up,
Yeah. So pay attention. Again, you're playing against human beings. Pay attention to the tendencies.
Correct. Right. Like we're in no limit hold'em and stuff, like in, you can kind of go on autopilot, and even in PLO, you could probably go on autopilot, just play tight and look at your cards and have good hands and, value bet and all that. But like the edge in limit games comes from paying attention to player tendencies. I think that's where the vast majority of the win rate comes from.
Yeah, and I mean, even in no limit hold'em, right? Like it's still opponent tendency based. It's
correct.
Like,
yes, for sure. I just think like at the lower limits, you can kind of check out and just sit on your iPad and
be a potato, just sit there and wait for the nuts and get paid because nobody's really paying attention.
Correct.
As you move up, for the listener, as you move up in stakes, people are not going to be that unobservant, right? They're going to be, they're going to understand what you're doing and play into your nature. So correct. You always have to pay attention. I think like what I love about No Limit is just like bet sizings is such a massive data point that can, you can just crush people if their frequencies are out of whack with different sizes that they choose in different spots early in the decision tree and then later in the decision tree, right. Even more so because I think like obviously as you go deeper, it becomes more complex and more understudied and people kind of revert back to their defaults as it relates to no limit hold'em. But so what are you doing nowadays? So like, are you a full-time mixed game player? I think Matt mentioned you're a businessman. Do you want to talk about your business?
Yeah, I got a lot of hats on. I always have had a lot of hats on, for the last 5 or 6 years. I've kind of, branched out and I love playing poker and poker's like a huge passion of mine, but, having multiple revenue streams and other stuff is just smart business and has allowed me to have the freedom to, do other things. And like, I never wanted to have my back up against the wall and be forced to play poker.
Yeah.
So like, and also that gives you the freedom to make good choices in poker and not be too worried about, next month's rent payment or, being able to go on this next trip with your buddies or whatever. Like, so I kind of got into sports betting 5 or 6 years ago. I started betting player props back then when it was very easy and different than what it is now. I still do a lot of sports betting stuff. I work with, some other groups and, we get down, decent sized volume on sports. So sports is, takes up a decent amount of my time.
Tell me about that because that's a tough field to gain
very small edge. And, the swings are big and you got to be able to stomach them, we're trying to win, 1 to 3%, so like what 1 to 3% actually feels like what people, think, you're doing. Because when the times are good, but like 1% over a year is good. It's really good money, but the swings can be vicious.
Yeah. They can, you feel those swings, those 1 to 3% swings over a short period of time. A friend of mine who's the smartest human that I know, professional sports bettor for the last decade or so. And like, yeah, you put down big volume, you have big swings, you have really great days, you have really horrible days. So right. You have to be prepared.
If people think poker swings are bad, high volume sports betting is even sicker, but you got to trust the process and I just ride the wave. I don't do any of the analytical, algorithm, making the pick side of things. So I'm more on the management, making sure we, can get down the right volume that we need to get down. So,
and why sports betting? Like, I assume it's just a natural segue from poker that sports.
Yeah. And also too, like being in the gambling world, you have good connections to people that are in the sports betting world. So it's kind of just a natural fit and natural progression. So like, there's a lot of people that I play poker with that I also do sports business with too also. So it's, it kind of goes hand in hand.
And speaking of like those alternative revenue streams, if there's a listener out there that maybe plays poker professionally and, kind of feels stuck in this cycle of life expenses and winnings being about even, breaking even for long periods of time, not able to grow their bankroll, what would you say some low hanging fruit to create some additional revenue streams?
I mean, I kind of lucked into the sports betting thing because I started off betting kind of small and was doing my own thing. And then, met some people that were also in the similar field and kind of had an opportunity to work with them and kind of was able to start small and grow really big. I mean, sports is getting way tougher than what it was. So I wouldn't recommend anybody going into sports now that doesn't have a solid base, because starting from nothing now with it, how tough it is now versus what it was, 5-6 years ago, or even 10 years ago before I even got into it. Cause I felt like I even was kind of late to the game from people I talked to, but kind of just figuring out things that you can passively not spend a ton of time with that bring in, some extra money, and then kind of grow it from there, and kind of just have that mindset of being able to, okay, I'm going to start here. It's going to start as this, and like what the vision is, so that like in, 1, 3, 5 years, you have something that you're proud of and that can generate more revenue for you so that you can focus on things that you enjoy doing.
Yeah, going back to what you said about sports betting, that friend of mine, I'm not even sure how active he is in the sports betting world over the last couple of years, because he's like, it's really tough now. Like the sports betting world has gotten exceptionally more difficult.
Correct. 100%. I mean, I don't see myself being that actively involved in sports, in a couple of years, or maybe even 1 year. I don't know. I'm always evaluating and seeing how things are going and all that, but I don't think I'm going to be as actively involved as I was, for the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, I'll buy that. Well, what do you think is the most unexpected thing that's come from your poker journey?
I think, that's a good question. I think kind of just the life experiences and being able to, have a really good perspective on life and keeping things in perspective. Because I feel like people get, lost in the sauce, as they say, kind of just, going through life and not knowing why they're doing what they're doing, or not being happy or whatever. But, this kind of has given me the freedom to figure out myself and, be able to do something that I enjoy. I don't feel like I'm working, ever now, which is great, even though I'm very busy and doing a lot of things, to make money every day. But I don't feel like I'm like, oh, I hate doing this, or I hate waking up and, reporting to this person or whatever, So each day's, a different puzzle, and you kind of got to solve it and unwrap it. And then,
yeah. That's a great perspective. And you got to give yourself a little bit of credit there, because I've met lots of poker players who are, as they say, lost in the sauce, and they just show up and are just miserable every single day. Like every single thing is a hassle, even, no matter how small it is, just really bad outlooks on life. So I think that some credit is due that you have that positive perspective and you're able to really enjoy the process of showing up at the tables and spending your life force playing cards.
Yeah, right. I mean, the biggest thing is that I don't have to show up to the tables. That's why I love showing up to the tables. Because if I had to show up to the tables, I probably, would be miserable. If I had to be there and I had to rely on winning, every day, or I couldn't sustain a 2 or 3 month downswing or 6 month downswing or whatever it may be. I mean, it's tough to keep, that mental fortitude to be able to go through and keep plowing away when you're my bankroll was, X and now it's Y. And especially in mixed games where I'm at now, there's really no drop off. There's 200, 400, and all the whole middle limits that I used to play, 6, 7 years ago, the 40, 80, 60, 120, even 30, 60, those don't exist anymore. It's either, basically 200, 400 or 12, 24. So there's no real option to go back down.
Yeah. It's interesting that it just feels like that's the young man's cycle, right? The young up and comer, hungry person who wants to be a poker pro, they deal with those cycles so much more positively than like somebody who's been in it for a decade, right? That's like has to show up, needs to play poker to pay their bills, goes on downswings and upswings. Those guys, you know, if poker is their only revenue stream, tend to turn out as seemingly much more miserable than, you know, the young kids who are just hungry and curious and actively engaged and love the game.
Correct. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I've seen my handful of, poker pros that only did poker and then, kind of saw where they were headed. And I was like, that's not for me. Cause I was always like the young guy in the mixed game crowd. Like, everyone that was playing mixed games was, 5, 10, 20 years older than me on average. So like, I definitely was like, of the young, I'm for sure one of the youngest, in that like LA poker mixed game crowd. I'm for sure always the youngest player in the game.
Yeah. And again, another hat tip for picking up on, learning the wisdom of the peers, the players that you're playing against.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, a lot of these guys like off the table, like, we'd go have dinners and, talk about life and all that stuff. So, picked up a lot from them just basically on their journeys and what they did, and being open and being able to listen is huge. Like these guys were, went through it for that. So like, if I can pick up a little bit on it so that I can not make their mistakes and, learn from their successes, like that's a win.
Oh, it's huge.
Right. So off the table stuff is huge. Like,
yeah, like I wish I could go back and have multiple conversations with my 20-year-old self and be like, yo, you got to do this, avoid this. Like it would have saved me a lot of trouble.
Right. But then also too, on the flip side, like, those learning experiences and stuff in my early 20s where, whatever, like, I'm glad I went through that then, in my early 30s, I'm 31 now, like as long, I'm glad I went through that then and not now. So like, I'm also thankful that like, I like went through that stuff so that I was open to learning so that I didn't make the same mistakes that I made.
Yep. There's, sometimes wisdom gain is just tough, and people telling you things doesn't always resonate in the way that it ought to. And, you just got to go through it yourself, learn your lessons, and try to come out the other side a better human.
Right. But like, if you went through that stuff in the early 20s and then like, 6, 7 years down the road, people are talking about, similar things that went on, like you can at least now relate and be like, oh yeah, like be more mindful of that and, kind of recognize, you went through that. Like, let's make this a priority not to slip down that road.
Yeah. And, hit rate's not always ultra high because again, 21-year-olds, they got to learn their lessons the hard way. They got to. I'm
a totally different person from when 21-year-old me to 31-year-old me. Completely different person.
Oh, I don't even know who I was at 20 years old.
Right, exactly.
I don't recognize that human.
Right, exactly. Likewise.
You mentioned in the unexpected question, the most unexpected thing to come from your poker journey, the experiences. I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite poker experience, if any, just jumped to mind?
I don't really have like one. I don't really have like big,
what's a memorable one, right? Just like a day, a weekend, a week, just a joyful time in your poker career.
Probably the World Series. I mean, for me, probably the World Series. So I've played the main event every year since I turned 21. And even if I didn't have the money to, like, when I was 21, I had a $15,000 bankroll and I put 10,000 of it into the main event and, just figured, why not me? Of course, busted early day 2 and, wasn't very happy. But actually 2019, I got like 500th in the main event. And that 4-day run was like really amazing. Like, I don't really play that much No Limit Hold'em anymore, but I still enjoy playing the main event. Can't wait to play the next live one. But cashing the main event for the first time, getting somewhat deep in it and, enjoying that whole experience was great. Like I was so excited to wake up every day, and it's like it's hard to really recreate that anywhere else.
Yeah.
So I would say that is probably my most memorable right now, even though it's not like the best financial or whatever. Like it still was really cool waking up, day 4 and, all of that and being able to go play. And
yeah, I mean, one of the great joys in life is having something to look forward to, right? Waking up excited like it's Christmas morning and you're a child. I think that monetarily we can say that like Christmas wasn't always, we didn't gain a lot of things monetarily as kids and Christmas. We got a lot of toys and games and stuff, but like the excitement is like the biggest present, in my opinion, that children get every year. Just waking up Christmas morning, the anticipation. I think that like that's something that's undervalued as it relates to just the human life experience.
Yeah. Right. I mean, recently now, especially with like not being able to go, because I probably played, I wasn't like a really, hard grinder. Like some guys that were playing mixed games with me in LA would play, 40, 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week. I was probably closer to like 15 to 25 a week. But being able to put that in perspective and being able to appreciate, the journey and the process and, not getting yourself burnt out and being excited to go play is huge.
It's a big deal. Oh, it's a massive deal. Jason, tell me about presence. Why did you think presence was the missing weapon in the arsenal of poker players?
So everyone's a mindset champion when they're running great, right? But when you're getting crushed day after day and you haven't booked a win in forever and the confidence just gone, and you're trying to do this thing that you read about in a book or someone told you about, being logical and being happy that the money went in good when all you really want to do is cry and hit something at the same time. Like, how are you supposed to be logical in that moment? But that's the only moment when you really need it. What you need in that moment isn't mindset. You've already read all the mindset books and you already know what you're supposed to think and what you're supposed to do. What you actually need in that moment is presence. Presence is the ability to connect the dots between who you want to be and how you can actually be that person when you need it most.
So let's cut to the chase, right? Like, how do you do it? How do you stay more present when you're at the poker table?
Well, you get there by first deciding that you want more, right? That you want to grow your intuition, that you want to create more flow in your life, and that you want to reach your full potential as a player and as a person. And once you get there, you can start trying out some of the exercises and practices that I've put together. If it feels good, if you're enjoying it, you can keep going, right? And if you keep going long enough, eventually you'll find that you're just playing at really high levels, that you feel good with low stress, and you're enjoying your experience a lot more. Not just at the table, but away from it as well.
I personally would love to have as much presence as I possibly can in my day-to-day life. And if you, the listener, right now wants to add some presence to your game, visit pokerwithpresence.com, join Jason Sue's email newsletter, and then schedule a free consult with the master of presence himself. One more time, that's pokerwithpresence.com. What would you say? So speaking of the process, what does your process look like? Again, as granular as you can for improving your game on a regular basis.
So when, the pandemic first hit, our game switched online for a while, and that was really good. From March to June, it was really strong, but the losing players lose way faster in mixed games online because it's just way faster pace versus like live is pretty slow. We're getting maybe, 18 to 24 hands an hour live. If you're playing split pot games and, draw games and stuff, it's really slow versus online. I mean, the hands whip out, we're getting, 2 to 2.5 times more per hour. So even if we were playing smaller stakes, sometimes we'd be playing 2 tables of really fast games. That's bigger than, what we were playing. Like if we were playing 2 tables of 50, 100, that's could be as big as 2-4 live, just on the pace and, the
volume. And plus, right, like emotions come way more into play when you're
right.
saying,
it's just easier to click the button. You don't have to look stupid, live thinking about something. So like, right. Yeah. So, I mean, kind of just, reviewing some equity spots and like, should I be opening this in this spot versus this range kind of stuff. So just kind of looking at certain spots and just analyzing certain spots now, because I've played the game for so long that, I mean, I'm not super into the solvers and that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, I've dabbled, but like, it's not my cup of tea. I mean, I'm sure I'm missing out on some things, but that's just kind of not how part of my poker process. I mean, it could be one day, but I really don't see that,
do they
being a
have
part of my process.
many mixed game solvers? Like for
they're out there for sure. I mean, 100%, they're out there for sure. Like especially like in a game like No Limit Deuce to 7 single draw, where it's very cut and dry. Like you need to be bluffing at this frequency versus this and stuff. But I mean, we're playing cap games, and it's not so like if we're playing Deuce 7 No Limit at 2 and 400, it's 100 200 with a $200 button ante. So like it's still like very player dependent, because like guys will open to 600 or 700, and if you jam on them and they don't have a pat hand, they're gonna fold. So you can jam way wider on them than other people who are never folding, or you pat a hand, they're gonna break and draw smooth every time. So you can pat wider than you would normally against certain players or whatever. So I still think it's very player dependent, but the solvers are for sure out there. But being able to take that information and put it in real time in a live setting, I think is very tough. I mean, it's for sure useful. Don't get me wrong. It's for sure useful. I just think that, I don't know. It's kind of, yeah.
I mean, I know what you're saying, right? Like from an intuitive perspective and somebody that constructs ranges based on player tendencies, understanding like equilibrium strategies when you're never going to be running into somebody who's playing at equilibrium, right? You're always deviating from equilibrium based on tendencies. It makes
Correct.
a lot of sense to kind of figure it out while, just figure out tendencies and then figure out what you think the appropriate response is and just execute.
Correct. Right. Exactly. Because like, maybe you should be, jamming X amount of hands over this guy's open, but like, is that really going to be winning long term when he's, I mean, you can plug in, he's opening this range, but like how he reacts to your jam, gets a little more complicated, and, going down that path, I guess, is,
well, it gets a lot more complicated, especially if like somebody's emotionally compromised, if somebody's winning for the session, like all of these.
Right, exactly. A lot of mixed game guys, like if they're winning, they're tough to play against. But if they're losing, I mean, I'm not leaving. Like that's how drastic it gets. And like too, it's like in limit games too, when you get stuck and you lose, a lot of, you lose 20 bets or 30 bets, it's hard to dig out of that hole mentally for the session. So like a lot of people just start chasing, and they, make their losses. Instead of losing, 25K at 2 and 400, they can lose like 60, 70K, and it's like, it's tough for me to ever lose, those big of numbers, because it's just, I'm not going to do what they're doing trying to chase.
Yeah, that's another element of human beings that are hard to solve, right? This Jekyll and Hyde nature.
Right, exactly. Because like if, this person's opening, if they're getting it all in and drawing 2 cards in no limit single draw, like you need to be doing something way different than what the solver says, like.
Yeah, it's, again, the human element, it's part of what makes poker such a beautiful game, is just playing against the same player who's in different emotional states, and they're going to be choosing different actions based on how they feel. It just makes poker super fun for me and super complex, and really like it's hard to nail down the right solves for those specific situations when strategy just deviates based on emotion.
Correct. Right. Exactly. So like I'm kind of in, I'm definitely agreeing with you and whatever, and I'm sure there's going to be other people that have a vastly different view, and you can say, okay, yeah, well, if this guy's opening 100%, these are the, these are the, solves and these are the actions you need to take versus this guy that's on, monkey tilt or whatever. And, that, but I feel like figuring out, because like also too, like when you're like learning poker from like a solver perspective, it's hard to like when, curveballs and wrenches get thrown at your way, like you need to be able to have that intuitive, and that pattern recognition and that, understanding like their emotional stability and all that to be able to make a good decision also, because like you're not going to be able to memorize everything.
Right. Like you're not going to be able to memorize and execute and then also adjust on the fly correctly. Right. Like it's just
right. And there's also too, there's multi-way pots and like, being able to push one guy out or trap one guy in there, especially in limit games, is like huge, which is more complex and more intuitive than what the solvers are, because solvers are usually 1v1. Correct? I'm totally
they're multi-way, like the complexity just grows exponentially.
Correct, right, exactly. So like in limit games, there's tons of multi-way pots. Way more so than no limit hold'em, So being able to know when to put in that extra bet or when to, trap and let this other guy in is huge. So like figuring out like, maybe you do want to just call where the solver would say jam, because this other guy behind you, is taking advantage, is going to pick up on that this guy's opening huge, and like you're trying to get in there cheap, and well, now they're going to shove, and now you have a monster, and now you've gained a ton of equity by doing something that's the exact opposite of what the solver would say in that spot against this one open.
Yeah, calling to create an over-aggressive action to trap an opponent taking advantage of another opponent's tendencies.
Correct, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And the list goes on and on of those type of spots.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes more sense to me. Like, you can use solvers for efficiencies and maybe precision in some of these spots.
And a baseline, too.
And a baseline. Good. Yeah, but when it comes to deviating and thinking on the fly, like, there's no powerful tool than your human intuition and your human ability to navigate those spots. So,
right, and your experience too. Like me, even 2 years or 3 years ago, it's like, looking back on it now, I'm like, what was I doing? Like there's spots and hands that I'm like, oh, that was terrible, or I was too gun shy here, and I should have taken a more aggressive action, or stuff that I didn't do then, now I do now. Like certain whatever.
Yeah, you're learning, right?
Hands in certain spots that I would fold before, or vice versa.
It's part of the process, like this learning, right. This evolution, becoming a stronger player year after year after year.
But it's also evolving too. Like people were doing things differently 2 or 3 years ago, so maybe that was right back then, but now it doesn't really make much sense.
Yeah, it's a different perspective because you're playing a different game.
Right.
I want to ask you the opposite question of your most joyful moment, your most painful moment. When you think of pain in your poker career, what's the first memory that comes to mind?
So that first summer, actually, and now that you asked that question, I have an answer for one of the happiest moments. So after the first World Series, I had $15,000 left, and I put $5,000 in the 5K PLO8 tournament and got it in really good, about 9 away from the money, and didn't work out and was devastated. Then played the main event and was basically, I was basically down to like crumbs, so my good friend at the time, Greg Sessler, said, come to Reno, come play these $100 tournaments. There's a 1K main event. You can satellite in. It's really soft. Let's go up there. So we go up there, and I go play like small, no limit cash, and kind of take the 1,000 or so or whatever crumbs that I have left, and, turn it into like 3,000 or 4,000. But like, I mean, busting basically like my roll from those two tournaments was straight pain. And then being able to go up there and have to grind these small, I'm playing $100 freeze out tournament when I was just playing a 5 and 10K, and playing 1-2 no limit and trying to win, that was pain.
Humbling. Yeah.
So humbling. And we kind of went from there. And then the first Mega Millions was down there, and he didn't do so good on the Reno trip. So I was like, come down here, like, I'll buy half your action in these tournaments. And this was when they had 20 opening flights, and we were both 0 for 14 and down to our last money again. And he ended up getting second for like 140,000, which kind of vaulted my poker career. So that was like really nice, because I had busted all of them and was like, what am I going to do now? Okay, I guess it's back to school and, back to the grind again and run up some money again and all of that. And yeah, so I mean, luckily he got second in that tournament for about 130, 140.
How did it feel watching that go down? I imagine that was a pretty nice sweat.
Oh yeah, I mean, right. I mean, I was at that final table. The payouts were absurd. First was 300,000 and ninth was 10,000. So like, I mean, it was just utterly absurd. And I came in there like with ICM, like ready to go. Like my buddy was late to the final table. I had already had everyone agree to a chop and like play for X amount. And my buddy comes in there slightly drunk too. And this is like, noon. And
exactly
like,
what you want to see.
Like, look, everybody's agreed. You're going to get 70,000 and you're going to play for about 50,000. They're going to leave 50,000 over or whatever, approximately those things. And he's like, no deal. And like ninth is 10 or 10K, eighth is 15K. Like the jumps were just insanity, like just complete nonsense. And they end up making a deal like, I think 5-handed and, play for some money heads up. And yeah, I mean, that was huge. And then I final tabled the 1K horse right after that.
Let's go back. Why didn't he want to take the deal? Like,
I still to this day don't know why he didn't want to take that deal right away. Like I came in there and, I wasn't even at the final table, but I was basically showing everyone, okay, these are the numbers. If you guys want to chop, these are the numbers. This is what everyone's going to get. If you agree, cool. If you don't, like, whatever, we'll go play and move on. So 8 people are there. My buddy is not there yet, okay? And, like, the final table is, like, about to start. And then, like, he strolls in at, like, the last possible minute and says, no, I want to play. Like, I think he just wanted to win the 300K, Like, he just had that in his mind. I'm like, dude, we both have no money. Like, this is, like, a solid starting point. Like, 70K will get us a long way. Like,
Yeah, he's like, no deal.
Right,
You're
exactly. Like, 5K is going to move the needle nothing for us. We get 5K each, or I think I was probably going to get like, whatever, 40% of it net after giving him his, free roll piece or whatever on it. Yeah. So, I mean, that was pain, but also,
a good outcome. He didn't just bust out right in ninth, right? You're like his ambassador making the deal. And then he shows up and he's like, no deal.
I'm like, what? Oh my God. I'm just like, oh, here we go again. And he got all in a flip and with like 7 left, which was like 20K at this point only.
Oh, Jesus.
Gets all in with a flip, like ace 10 versus 5s, and it comes like 10, 7, 3, and turns a 5. And luckily, like that, that 5 is huge. I'll still remember that 5. Like,
oh my God.
Yeah,
he had the 5, so he just got flops pin. And
I mean, look, when the flop came 10 high, like
you're done.
Okay, 10K, like here it comes, boom, 5.
Talk about a roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
You mentioned, so you move on right after that tournament. You got your 70K or 60K or however much it ends up being.
So he cashed for like, yeah. So I got like probably about like 60-ish K from it. From that score, I got about 60K from it. So that kind of propelled me. And then I played the 1K horse. I think a couple days later after that, I got second in that for like 20K, 17K, I think maybe somewhere in that range. I know we made a deal. I don't remember the exact details of it, but that kind of propelled me into playing, then I started playing 40, 80, 08 and kind of
just took off from there.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that was like I might not be a poker player had he not, like, if he just busted, on day one instead of the final table, which was, 4 days later, like this had like 16,000 runners, it's like a Sunday million almost, more or less, because it was like, it was a $230 buy-in. You got 12K in chips and like, yeah, I mean, it could have worked out way differently. Who knows where I'd be if that was, if he doesn't make that final table. So
Even if he just busts out a ninth, right? Like,
right, yeah, or if he busts out a ninth, exactly. Like if he just busts out a ninth, like who knows what happens, right?
Yeah, fate works in mysterious ways.
I can get behind that.
Imagine there's a carbon copy of yourself who's 20, 21 years old, getting into poker. If you could sit down that kid, give him some advice, what would you say?
Stay focused. I mean, well, I would probably say don't get into poker, honestly. Like, or if you want to be in poker, like poker's great, but have other things going on. Like, don't make poker your sole focus, because like it's just so easy to get lost in, the mindset of like being a pro poker player and like how draining it is and how mentally taxing it is. Like, poker's a great game and an amazing way to make money and to have fun and meet very interesting people and have, connections with a wide range of people that you would normally not get anywhere else. Like I have friends, close friends that are, 21 to, 60, like that we go hang out, have dinner with, talk about whatever. Like that's very rare in, today's society to have such a, wide range of friend groups and all this, that, and the other. But I would stay focused, don't get so heavily involved in like making sure that you're like worry about making the good decisions, not worrying about the results as much and being so caught up in the results, but be responsible, kind of just like, pay attention more and like, yeah, that's a hard
it's real hard because I have a feeling that like, our younger selves are like, yeah, whatever, man. We're just gonna fire. We're gonna go with this. Maybe like all that hardship is just the barrier to entry, right? Like maybe you just have to be kind of like halfway
right,
dumb.
Because like if somebody just hands you the keys and tells you all these things, like, yeah, that's great, but like I've learned so much from like, all the like hardships and stuff. Like when I was going and playing those Indian casinos when I was like 18, 19, I had like a 2 or 3K roll. And instead of playing like 1-3, I'd go play 5-10 and go home stone broke. And like those 100-mile, because I lived 100 miles from these casinos, either Chumash, Morongo, or the ones even down in San Diego or even further. But like driving home stone broke with one of my buddies and just talking about like what went wrong and all that, like those are so invaluable now looking back on those. Like where if I didn't have those experiences, like, who knows where I would be today versus then. So like, I value those things too, because like if you don't take enough risk either, that's also really bad. You're not giving yourself the full potential.
Yeah, that's another lesson in life, right? If you never fail, you're often staying in your comfort zone too much and not taking enough risks. And that's just for growth, all these things. At least it happens as a 20-year-old, right? We learn our lessons young with minimal responsibility and
correct.
able
if I
to
fell on my face, I had people there to pick me up and, help in some capacity where, now it's a different story,
Yeah. What would you say some common poker advice you hear that you completely disagree with?
Common poker advice that I disagree with. Probably, an overemphasis on like that there's a right answer to a situation, like people are like, okay, yes, you should be doing this in this spot. I think like if you're always doing something in this one spot, then somebody's going to do Y to counter that. Or if they're paying attention, like, I don't think there's always a right answer. And people can say, yes, okay, yes, you should be doing, you shouldn't be doing whatever it is in whatever spot. But I think like that there's a right, like you can always solve for a right answer. I think, yes, okay, in some instances you can, but to be reliant on that as a poker player, I think is not good.
Yeah, it's had Maria Konnikova on the podcast talking about her book, The Biggest Bluff, and one of her things, Eric Seidel, her mentor, what she put in my Billboard question was less certainty, more inquiry. And that's just such a beautiful way to sum that up, right? Like less certainty, more inquiry.
Right. Not not always assuming that there's a right answer, I think, is my big thing. Like,
or even if there is a good answer, is there a better answer? Right? Like
right.
not just stopping on a good answer. Can you level up? Can you improve to an even better answer than a good answer, right? Like I can manufacture variables that basically incentivize all types of wacky play at the poker table and wacky decisions that don't really make much sense looking at it just from like the 50,000 foot view, but like you get in it and then scenarios develop where you just have to deviate, think on the fly, and try to be the poker player that makes the better adjustments.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, my big thing was, anybody can justify any play that they want to make, and you can say a couple smart things that sound right and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But like, does it really? No. I mean, I can justify doing something wacky because I'm setting somebody up for something later, but like, is that smart or whatever? Probably not, but I can justify, almost any play with some wacky, I can come with some wacky reasoning or rationale for it that, it's like, okay, yeah, well, I didn't want to look stupid, but at the end of the day, it was probably stupid.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think that the major problem as it relates to poker players is that they would rather seem smart than make the money. Like they want other people to think they're smart rather than just making the decisions that capture the most EV and make the money.
Right. I mean, I think a big thing too is like, people are always caught up with how their peers view them, like.
Yes. Validation seeking.
Right. Exactly. So like, I would always rather be underestimated on my abilities than like, overestimated, because like, I mean, obviously there's a big switch to like private games and, that whole thing. And so like, you want to be underestimated. You don't want to be like known as like this killer, who's the best of the best, because you're not going to get in games now. I mean, when things go back to normal, where casino poker's, regular again, it's going to be a lot of politics and who and all that stuff. So like, I mean, I can take it or leave it. If I'm left out of certain games, fine. That's like a compliment to me. But if I'm invited in those games too, it's like, they must think that I'm not that good at something. So that's why I'm here. So, but being able to be cognizant and aware of that is huge, because
just because like your peers don't understand what you're doing doesn't mean it's even bad or wrong. Right.
Correct. Right. I mean, they don't see my cards, 80% of the time. So they might see me turn over some hand in some spot that they'd be like, oh, I never have that there. But like, they don't know the other 9 hands that I followed previously to that, like what was going on, or I did something well that they didn't think of, or vice versa or whatever. So it's like, it's very hard to judge, like in mixed games, especially like, because like, if you're running bad, like it might look like you're just torching it, like where you're just in unavoidable spot after unavoidable spot. And it's just like, the cards aren't breaking your way in that one thing. But then people think you're just, on tilt and playing every hand and whatever the case may be. So it's like very hard to tell, like, especially like within like this similar skill rate, skill grouping of players, like who's better than who, or, what the hierarchy is, where like in No Limit Hold'em and PLO, like, who the best players are.
Yeah.
It's very easy to tell, like in a 9-handed game, who the best and second best are, where like in a 7-handed mixed game, there might be 3 recreational players and then there's 4 pros. Of those 4 pros, it could be very interchangeable, like on a given day, who looks the best. And you could look at and observe that game and be like, oh, this guy's the best. But then same group a week later, of those 4 pros, the one that you said was the best might be, you might look and say, oh, he's the worst of those 4. So it's like, it's very hard to tell the difference between all the top players, because the decisions are so small and it's so hard to pick up on, like, but then when you do recognize, like, be like, oh wow, like this guy picked up on this spot, and like, you're like impressed that he did X against you or whatever. And you're like, oh, he knows what he's doing, and like, you got to give him his props.
Yeah. It's one of those things where like, when you're in it, right? Like when you're an expert, you see the subtle nuanced things that separate good and great in action. And that is, you're able to see that and then give that respect, right? Whereas like,
correct, but that might only happen once an hour or once every 2 hours or something. And if you're not paying attention, you might miss it, like,
or if you don't know what to look for, right? Like you
correct.
just, in mixed games, I could see that being way more heavily disguised than in like No Limit Texas Hold'em, right? Like you.
Correct. Yes. 100%.
Right. So that's huge positive in the mixed game column of disguising. It's hard to discern who's the best player, who's the best pro at any given time. And that allows you to probably play in some games, some private games, get invites that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get.
Correct. Right. And being, personable and,
that helps. Not a robot.
Correct. And I mean, a big thing now is being able to lend to certain players. Like that's kind of the key to getting into some of these games, is being able to lend, which is not always fun, but it's kind of, a necessary thing to have to do. So
I'm glad I'm not in that scene right now, because it seems
right. I mean, that's kind of why I've pulled away from it. Like I'm not like a quote, like I'm not like a regular, because like the regulars do, but like I can, I don't get in all the good games. I don't, even before March when all this stuff, like I didn't get in the best games, but I got into some and enough, and I played when I wanted to play, and like didn't have to get in all that stuff. But if I wanted to, like, when poker restarts in LA in normal capacity, all these things that were existing, got broken down. So now it's going to have to be start back over again. So like, if I do want to jump back into that thing, like I have to know that that's like the type of things that you have to get into to be in the right spot. So like I can either, play very few hours, or maybe I want to play a bunch of hours and have to be in that situation. So just kind of evaluating what I want out of the situation and,
going from there. Yeah. It's a tough path. Sort of, the game has just changed from, studying, preparing, showing up, playing cards, cashing out, going home. There's a whole nother game within a game that you've got to be good at and skilled at.
Who you're comfortable lending to, how much to lend them, versus like when then you're not going to get paid back, or it's going to be really slow to get paid back, or, knowing what their other situations are, and that they owe X, Y, and Z, like now are you at the bottom of the list? Like, but then you also too don't want to press them too much to ask for the money back, because then they might not show up again. I mean, it's just, the list goes on and on.
Yeah. Again, I don't envy anybody that's in that cycle and has to deal with that, because that's a lot of added stress.
The games won't run if certain players aren't there, especially in LA. Like the games just won't run.
Yeah. I definitely believe that. Just got to do what you got to do. That's the nature of the beast. If you could gift all poker players one book to read, what would it be and why?
Well, one that's recent was Mike Sexton's book. And, I played golf with him and had, handful of conversations with him. I think his book, I mean, that's a recent one that I've read, but, that one I think puts the poker player's lifestyle into perspective the best, and kind of gives you that perspective that, it shows like the ups, the downs, the
nitty gritty,
like somebody that's been through it, because this is, his story, like it shows like from when he was, and he also had a vision to, have additional revenue streams outside of poker too, which are within poker, but not requiring him to play poker.
Right. Party poker. That was the
right. To have that vision. Exactly. To have that vision, and the World Poker Tour too, also, so like, all of that. And, Mike is nobody has a bad word to say about him. And, he was a really awesome dude. And,
Yeah. I had Matt Savage on the podcast when that was, really close to near the end there. And yeah, it's just kind of a brutal gut punch and massive loss for the poker world. And
yeah,
I've spoken with many human beings in the poker world, and not one human has said anything bad about Mike Sexton. So,
right. That's a testament to who he was. So,
especially when you know poker players as well as we do.
Correct. Right. Exactly. Right. You get the whole range of
Yeah. So check out Mike Sexton's book. What is the name of it?
Life's a Gamble.
Life's a Gamble. Yeah, I was blanking on the name. It's story based, right? Bunch of
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, story based, easy read.
My favorite type of poker book.
Right. Not too much there's no real strategy in there. Just kind of, it just gives you perspective on somebody that's been through it, and their experiences, and how you can how it relates to poker now.
Look, I totally get it. You feel like being a lone wolf in your poker journey has hamstrung your ability to realize your full potential. So I'm about to give you a golden opportunity to plug into a supportive tribe that will be the poker family you've always wished you had. How much money would you give for 1 hour of interactive group coaching led by myself, Coach Thomas, and occasionally past guests of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast? For now, and this will absolutely change at some point in the near future, the price of admission to the live Poker Power Hour is 100% free. All you've got to do to get your invite is head to chasingpokergreatness.com and hop on the VIP newsletter. No more excuses, no more procrastination. It's time to take action and put yourself in position to turn your poker dreams into reality. I hope to see that beautiful face of yours in just a couple of days. If you could erect a billboard, every poker player's got to drive past on the way to the casino, what would it say?
Is this more for professional poker players or just poker players in general?
Either one. Whoever it is you want to give a short, bite-sized message to.
Stay humble.
Yeah. Humility. It's hard being arrogant in the poker world. It's an easy way to go broke. It's an easy way to struggle.
Right, exactly. I think humility is huge. It's going to make you, reflect and, check your ego at the door. Like, you're going to get gut punched a bunch, and being able to stay humble and, stay, even keeled is huge. So I think just stay humble would be my billboard.
Yeah, because when you're arrogant and you get gut punched, you start victimizing yourself. You start blaming everybody in the world and every other thing in the world for what's going on besides yourself. And it's really hard to learn from.
Correct. You're like, why me? Why am I unlucky? Why did I take this bad beat? Like, this only happens to me. Like, that gets you nowhere.
No, I've never met a successful poker player, a long-term successful poker player that has that mindset and has that outlook.
Right. I mean, you're drawing dead from the jump if you think like that. You're just, because it's gonna follow you around. Like, that's just like a dark cloud, over your head at that point. Like, and then now you don't have the confidence either to make the right decision, because you're like, oh well, I'm just gonna be unlucky in this spot, or I'm gonna, like, this high equity spots, I'm gonna lose the flip in this high equity spot, and this sucks. And yeah.
Whenever you have that aura too, guess what? You repel all the people that could possibly help you, and you attract the people who are just like you. So, like, you don't get wisdom.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's just, it's a vicious cycle that, basically guarantees failure.
Yeah. And that kind of goes back to the thing of, like, having a good friend group that is supportive and understands, and, like, they don't have to do what you do, but, like, being able to have a supportive friend group and support system in poker is huge. Like, there's very few people that are total lone wolves that do well in poker, because, like, it's just, you need to have that interaction and that being able to either escape or be able to discuss and, talk about what's going on in your poker life.
It's a necessity. Like you said, lone wolves at the highest levels just don't exist. They all have these peers, these mentors, the